Welcome to the You're Not Crazy podcast, hosted by Jessica Knight, a certified life coach who specializes in healing from narcissistic and emotional abuse. This podcast is intended to help you identify manipulative and abusive behavior, set boundaries with yourself and others, and heal the relationship with yourself so you can learn to love in a healthy way. You can connect with Jessica and find additional resources, content, and coaching at emotionalabusecoach.com.
Hello, and thank you for being here. Before we dive in, I want to go through the fine print and share how we can work together. Because healing from this kind of pain takes a lot more than time. It takes the right kind of support. I work with people entangling themselves from emotionally abusive relationships, coercive control, trauma bonds, high conflict co-parenting dynamics, high conflict divorce, and if you're at the beginning of the road and wondering what divorce would look like. I offer one-on-one coaching at every stage. If you're still in the relationship, if you're unsure if it's abuse, if you know it's abuse but you're having trouble understanding what that looks like, or what to do with it, I can help you name what's happening, start setting boundaries that work for you, and figure out what you need. If you're thinking about leaving, we'll explore what that might look like in a grounded and personalized way. If you're navigating divorce or custody or co-parenting with a high conflict person, I can help you document, strategize, and stay emotionally anchored, especially when you're being gaslit, discredited, and re-traumatized by the legal system. If you've already left and you're stuck in the trauma bond, or if you've been discarded and struggling to feel like yourself again, I can help you rebuild self-trust and reconnect with your own nervous system in a way that actually feels doable. Everything I do is highly personalized. I don't walk you through a one-size-fits-all program. I listen, I reflect, and I guide you based on what you're facing right now. And some people work with me through a one-time validation call, which is offered on my website, where we zero in on one issue you're struggling with and start to untangle it together. Others work with me on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, depending on what's going on in your specific situation. And this is especially helpful when healing from emotional abuse and also in divorce. If you're curious about starting, I offer a $25 intro call, which if you listen to my older episodes, I call it a clarity call. It did used to be free, and I talk about it at a later episode, but really a lot of people were no-showing to those calls, and that was taking away time from clients that I do work one-on-one with. And so if we move forward, I just take that fee and apply it to your first session. That intro call is just for us to get on the same page so you can share what's going on for you and I can share how I might be able to help. I only take a limited number of those calls per month because one-on-one coaching is the core of my work. Out of all these offerings that I have, one-on-one coaching is the thing that I do the most, and I do it 6 days a week most of the time, 5 to 6 days a week. And so if my calendar looks full and if there's not a time that you can get in, you can email me at jessica@jessicaknightcoaching.com, and I always try and make space where I can. And I may also always have a few openings from one-on-one client reschedules. You can also explore self-paced courses and toolkits at jessicaknight.thinkific.com, including Divorcing a Narcissist 101 and the Emotional Abuse Breakthrough course. I have a documentation course and my new signature program, Unhooked, which is a private podcast and course that walks you through the full cycle of abuse, helps you map it in your relationship and how to break it and how to begin to see what it really is that you're going through. If you want ongoing support in a more flexible way, you could always check out my Substack at jessicaknight.substack.com. Each month I focus on a different theme, from trauma bonding to divorce to cluster B to sexual coercion to emotional abuse to toxic breakups. Those are just some from this year. Paid members get access to monthly deep dives, master classes, Q&As, strategy kits, and I'm working on some more group options. There is also a free option and a monthly option. So please head over to Substack. The link is in my show notes. You also can just search Jessica Knight Coaching and I'll come up. Everything that I create is meant to help. My coaching, my writing, my courses, this podcast, it's built around the one truth that you're not crazy. You are conditioned to doubt your reality, and I want to help you change that and understand what you're going through. If you like this podcast, the best thing that you can do is subscribe and rate the episode 5 stars. You can find me on my websites, emotionalabusecoach.com and high-conflict divorcecoaching.com. All of the offerings that I just mentioned are also in the show notes below. Now let's get to the episode. Today, I want to talk about something that I think is really hard to put into words. And when I was writing this, it was coming from a theme that came up when I was recording the private podcast Unhooked about mapping the cycle of abuse. And I kept trying to conceptualize it and to think about it, but like all I kept doing was thinking about like how this came up for me and how disorienting it was to put together, because I think in a lot of ways when we're with somebody that is struggling or has trauma or anything, like we are trying our best to make sense of what we're going through, but it's at what point do we say like that's their stuff, not mine? And I think one of the lesser talked about roots of abuse is shame and humiliation, and how it gets offloaded from one person to another in an attempt to escape that shame, escape the feeling of shame for them. And I was thinking about this in terms of myself. And of course, I have embarrassment. Of course, I have shame. Of course, there are things that I regret. And it feels like it's mine to carry. It's not something I want to project onto somebody else. It's if I'm having that feeling, I want to unpack it and understand it within myself. And then figure out what I'm going to do with that. I think in an abusive relationship, we don't really even realize that somebody is taking their feelings and putting them on us until our entire sense of self is starting to unravel. And it doesn't just like hurt. It's like, it almost feels like our entire sense of self feels separate from us as time goes on in the cycle of abuse. And I've talked on this podcast before about how a narcissist or somebody with narcissistic traits is like always running away from shame. It's like they rather throw you in front of a car than feel their own shame. And I'm sure you have been with someone, or even, even if you haven't, you've seen this, because this is how the media presents it, is that abusive people will use rage as their release valve. Like they just need to get it out. And it's not because they planned it, but because they never learned how to hold and handle their own emotions. So they constantly are angry or reacting, and their shame becomes so loud and uncomfortable. So they have to hand it to someone else, or the way I like to think about it is like they have to throw it at them. And if you're the closest person to them, and this does come up in parent-child relationships too, you're the one who ends up carrying it. And at first you might think, did I say the wrong thing? Did I cause this? You might be walking on eggshells around somebody that's really dealing with a lot of stuff at work that they're not taking accountability for, and you can see that. But deep down, your nervous system knows this isn't me and something's off. And there's a moment when you realize that they just don't want you to hurt, but they feel like you deserve to hold that shame for them. Like being in a relationship means that you have to do that. And that moment creates a rupture. Because if the person that's raging at you is somebody who you were taught to trust, or that you are choosing to trust. So taught to trust would be a parent, but like choosing to trust or being told, kind of, I should trust a partner, someone says they love you. It fractures your ability to feel safe. Really anywhere, not just in the relationship, but like in your own body. And when I was experiencing this, it was like his shame was so uncomfortable that he had to continue to throw it at me so that I was taking responsibility in some way, even though I had nothing to do with what was going on. And he couldn't tolerate his own feelings. It was like feelings of failure, inadequacy, or even like contradictions within himself. So he would just offload them onto me. And every time I was vulnerable, he made me feel like I was unstable. But when he emotionally withdrew and I asked why, like what's going on, he would imply I was too needy, but never, ever, ever saw the contradiction in how needy he was all of the time. But it was this way of projecting the pain onto me. And I see this happen for a lot of clients. The cycle then starts to repeat itself. And when a person can't tolerate their own feelings of shame, of inadequacy, of just even vulnerability, they often project them outward and they punish somebody else, usually someone more vulnerable and close to them, as a way for them to get temporary relief. If you think about a kid, and like my kid's 8, when she's dysregulated, when she lashes out, like I am the source of pain. I'm also the source of comfort for her, but I'm supposed to be, in this case, I'm supposed to be her comfort. I'm her mom. But when we see this happen in a romantic relationship, it will be like your partner explodes on you and you find yourself, like trying to handle it or understand it or figure it out. But probably what happens is you end up snapping on somebody else. And if you think about like where this repeats, and this is where it gets scary for me, is that say a parent is offloading like that humiliation onto a kid, the kid internalizes it. And that's happening in romantic partnerships. One partner keeps offloading, you internalize it, and then you get stuck trying to understand where your feelings are allowed to exist. And most abusers have an inner script that they're running on all the time, and they don't just explode out of nowhere, but they have like a justification or a storyline associated. And a lot of times it's not grounded in reality. It's a pure projection, meaning that they have come up with this because they have decided that their feelings are now facts and that is the feeling that they're running with. And it could sound something like, they're ungrateful. They always make me feel like the bad guy. They never listen. They need to be taught a lesson. They need to change. And so it's always projected outward onto you. And a lot of times the script doesn't feel like a choice, but it feels true. And then once it gets going, it gives them permission to rage. So all of this is happening in their mind. Like they thought about it. They've come up with justifications. Now they're acting on it. When a healthy person, a mature person, a healthy minded person, when we have those thoughts come in, we usually have like a filter that goes, wait, what? Right? Like that person's not this. I might feel like they're ungrateful in this moment, but they're not ungrateful in their core, unless they are, obviously, then that's a different, it's a different framing. But it makes it almost like gives them permission and a sense of righteousness. Because after the storm, they don't feel that guilty. But like the problem is that if you're the person being punished, you don't really see the script. You only feel the impact. And then you absorb the story. He screamed at me for being cold. All I did was ask a question. She calls me disgusting and then acted like it never happened. He told me no one would love me, but I didn't change. And when you're repeatedly humiliated by a partner, your nervous system adapts to that for survival. So you might fight back, like you snap, you raise your voice, you say you're the problem, but they'll say you're the problem when you do that. You emotionally check out. You might think about daydreaming of escape, which would be flight. You go into freeze. So your mind might go blank. You disassociate. You can't speak. You might forget what you were trying to say at times. And then you start to feel like you can't even explain what's going on. I cannot tell you how many people come to me and start there of saying like, I don't even know how to explain to you what's going on. Or you fawn, which I pick up a lot in people after we start to unpack things, is that You apologize, you smooth things over, try to earn their affection. You do anything to prevent the abuse. And survivors often internalize the belief that they're too sensitive or dramatic, or that they need to work harder to avoid conflict, that they're not doing enough. And what they don't see is that they've been conditioned to carry somebody else's shame and then blame themselves for it. This is the core of their defense mechanism, the abuser's defense mechanism. The abuser must find a way to justify hurting someone they claim to love. And so their mind creates two tasks, in my perception. One, convince themselves that the other person deserves it. Or two, make sure nobody sees it clearly. So this is a way to say narrative control. They're forming narrative control. And this is why a lot of times people will realize abuse happens behind closed doors, is because they act differently in public. It's also why you might look unstable when you finally react, because other people haven't seen you act that way. They aren't seeing the depths of what's going on, right? And that's why reactive abuse is really actually self-defense, because you're experiencing psychological torture. And of course you finally react, because this form of abuse isn't loud in the beginning. It's psychological abuse. It builds through those quiet comments, escalating tension, and a sense that you're doing something wrong just by showing up, just by existing. And I used to write in my journal, they're always trying to make me feel like the bad guy. And the truth is, when I look back at that, the specific relationship that I have in mind, is I'm too emotional, which I wasn't. He actually would also blame me for the opposite. I was only too emotional at the end of the relationship, but during the relationship, I wasn't emotional enough. And if you've ever heard me talk about the guy that would call me avoidant when I'm oh my God, if you only knew what it took to break my anxious attachment, which even if he knew, he would find a way to weaponize that too. But he was so committed in the inner script that his intention was more important than his impact. And I swear, if there's ever a soapbox I could stand on and say one thing, that's probably what I'm going to go off on, is that it doesn't matter what your intention is if the impact is continuing to hurt me, and you know that. But the script that he had in his head gave him permission to keep humiliating me while still believing he was reasonable. And he just weaponized emotional intelligence, even though he was insanely immature, to manipulate the narrative. And he would say things, I'm just being honest. You're overreacting. And it's he needed that script to justify how he treated me without having to face who he really was, which he could have done by just reading our text messages, by just being honest with the therapist, by just being honest with our couples therapist of what he actually was doing. But he wasn't willing to do that. And every boundary I set was met with this severe retaliation, because I wasn't letting the cycle continue. And it was real, but he needed it to continue because it was his way of releasing his own internal pressure. And I felt like an emotional garbage can the whole time. I really did. And I set boundaries because I didn't want to do that anymore. And when I see this come up in clients, and this is probably the part when I was creating that private podcast that I was thinking about, there are a lot of signs of this, right? You will notice there'll be accusations, generalizations. They'll mimic you, your appearance, your emotions, your voice. They want you to feel down. They do things with their body that intimidate you. Pound a fist, throw an object. They'll use, insults that are framed as jokes. You'll start to realize that they're really stuck. And often the aftermath of what happens is worse than the event, because you're expected just to move on as if nothing happened. And they might even act warm or say things like they're just upset, or it's your fault for triggering them. And you just wonder, is this love? Is this what this is supposed to feel like? Am I supposed to feel like a fucking mashed potato all the time? And I think one of the most hardest parts is what it does to your inner voice, because you begin to repeat the things they said. You anticipate the criticism, and you kind of beat yourself to the punch, right? You punish yourself before they can. In this relationship specifically, I realized before he could because he always was trying to get me to dress the way he wanted me to dress, which is very not me. And
it's like I went on the total opposite side of the spectrum. I think this was subconscious, but like I was wearing like these oversized t-shirts and like jean shorts and being like, I like, you want me in like this tight stuff that's not me, and I'm going to dress how I am comfortable. And it was like I was moving further away from the vision that he kept having, because like I was like, you know what? If he's going to make me feel like an ugly duckling, I'm going to look like one. And after each rupture, in my case, he would really pretend like nothing was wrong. So there'd be no accountability. And if I brought it up, I was the problem. And he would punish my need for clarity. And that came after the breakup. I've talked about it before. It was like a very typical BPD discard. So I'm going to discard you, but I want you to stay exactly in this little bubble that I've created. And I was like, I'm not in the bubble. And then I got blamed incessantly. And that was actually, that falls right into what I was just talking about that, my inner voice, right? I was carrying a lot of that inside of me for a while. And that's the trap. It's not just the incident or the pain. It's belief that this shame was mine and I should have been a better partner. And that's like the definition of a trauma bond, is that you carry these things. And abuse is not just about power and control, but it is about pain avoidance for the abuser. Like abusive people, there's a lot of things that they are dealing with that they're not, like they're dealing with outwardly by putting it on us, but not inwardly. But they don't want to face their own emotional wound. So they hand it off, or in my case, throw it at somebody else. But it's not your job to carry what they can't hold. They're adults and that's what they're responsible for. And if they have stuff, I have stuff. I talk about it all the time. I have severe trauma. I've been in therapy for almost my whole life. I was put in therapy as a kid. I literally sat there silent because I was like, the people you need to talk to are like, you go talk to my mom and my stepdad. I am not the problem. Like I was that kid. And I was like, I'm going to sit here silently because this is bullshit. But like once I got to be 16 and I was like extremely suicidal and like realizing I'm never going to get out, I did the work of working on myself. And it hasn't stopped. And sometimes I'm in doing multiple things at once, or I'm reading, or I'm figuring out, like I journal. I'm always thinking about myself. So when somebody's throwing this stuff on me all the time, I do think, is it me? Am I a bad partner? What could I do differently? And then I realize like, no matter what I do is never going to be enough. Also, they're adults, and healing begins for you when you start to name that cycle, when you start to see it's not just the chaos that they create, but like there's a whole system around this. But you didn't cause it. You don't cause all these feelings they have. And the cycle can end with you because you're not responsible for it. And like something that really helps me is when I think about, I never want my daughter to feel this way or feel that she's responsible for somebody else's feelings in this way. She's like, I feel like she's the only person in the world that I'll hold all the space in the world for when she's feeling the way that she's feeling. But that is not what we need to do with partners. Like that's not emotional maturity. It's really not a relationship either. But it's like over time, either from our parental relationships, our romantic relationships, or both, we become conditioned to carry their shame. It's not your burden. It's like they teach us that our normal human needs are weaknesses, and that when we're like questioning all this stuff, they have more control because we're confused. And so if you're in this place and you're listening to this, one of the things you can do, or maybe the one thing to do, is like stop internalizing it the best that you can, really get clear and ungaslight yourself. If everything in your nervous system and everything in like your inner voice is saying, I'm the problem, I caused this, I'm overreacting, I want you just to really think about it. Did you write that script or did somebody else? If it was written by the abuser, you need to start rejecting that script because it's not the truth. But it can be really helpful to write it down. Calling it what it is begins to break the cycle. And that's what Unhooked is about, that private podcast. It's about beginning to break the cycle of abuse. But first, we have to understand and see the cycle of abuse in our relationship. And regulating your nervous system is like It's so important. So is beginning to rewire your inner voice. And I know that's not something I talk about that much. I am working on some content on it, which will be on my Substack. But every time you hear the abuser's voice in your head, you're dramatic, you're the problem, you're unlovable. Replace it with a voice of truth. Like that could be somebody else's, right? It's like, no, I'm not that. I was reacting to cruel behavior. Nope, my sensitivity is not a flaw. Nope, I'm not hard to love. I'm being manipulated. It's not just positive affirmations, it's deprogramming from the abuse. I hope that this was helpful for you as I'm wrapping it up. I guess I'm feeling like, all right, there's like so many parts to this puzzle that I haven't touched on, but I think it is confusing because it's meant to be confusing. So my hope is that for you, it feels validating. And if you need support, you could always reach out to me at emotionalabusecoach.com. And all of the content posted in June 2025 on my Substack is about the cycle of abuse. And I did write about this. So if you are looking for something, I would go there and, start picking through some of those posts. A lot of them were free in June. I said June. It's July. I'm sorry. The July post. June was a different topic. I hope that this was helpful. And if you need support, like I said, you can always reach out to me at emotionalabusecoach.com.